Welcome, everyone. My name is Mark Waterfield, President and owner of Public Agency Training Council, and we really appreciate you being here at our third episode of the PATC podcast. We think that we have an excellent episode for you here. We have Brian Jarvis, a wonderful instructor, and my co-host, David Broadway. Say hello, David.
Hello. Hello, everybody.
Great to see you, Dave, and thank you so much. At Public Agency Training Council, we try to have at least 15 classes per week scheduled across the country. We have over 120 training classes and over 60 instructors. We have classes of every description that could be considered for law enforcement and fire officials, as well as teachers, schools, education. We really appreciate your interest in PATC. David, you want to give a little background about yourself?
Oh, I'd love to, Mark. My name is David Broadway, retired law enforcement, 34 years on the job. 10 of those years was with a local agency, and 24 was with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, where I worked in, I guess, all the divisions with the exception of crimes against children and computer crimes, and enjoyed a good career there. And also, I teach adjunct at Western Carolina University and teach adjunct for PATC, which I travel the country and give courses on confidential sources. And I think we're privileged today to review a case that anybody in law enforcement needs to look into to improve their skills.
Absolutely. We've got an excellent guest with us here today. Brian Jarvis is an extraordinary instructor who teaches for PATC. Brian, why don't you give us your background?
It's great to be here. And I had a little over 30 years total in law enforcement as a sworn officer, both in the state of New York and in the state of Florida. And I was very blessed in my career. And I started out in New York State for a number of years, and then I decided to relocate after I got tired of the snow and the ice and all the other stuff that goes along with it. And I wound up in Marion County, Florida, which is in the central part of Florida, just north of Orlando. I worked there for a number of years, starting as a patrol deputy, went into criminal investigations and into major crimes. I then became the supervisor of major crimes, I guess lucky enough to work some very high-profile cases, which was a tremendous learning experience for me. And we're going to talk about one of them today. After a number of years there, I went back up to New York, accepted a position as a chief of police. It was in Orange County, New York, which is just a New York City suburb. Finished my career there. I've been instructing with PATC now for over 20 years. I've been here doing a number of different classes, but we're currently doing a class for new detectives and criminal investigators, which we pretty much fill up every week. So it's a pretty good class that keeps us busy. And we just absolutely love being a part of the PATC family.
That's fantastic, Brian. And we very much appreciate our relationship with you as well as your partner in instruction, Tom Tittle. David, do you have a question for Brian?
I sure do. Getting started off here, Brian, is the case that we want to review today is, I don't know if you would agree with this, is kind of 101 on kind of down and dirty old school playing the long game police work. It wasn't very glamorous what you guys did there in the first to try to put this thing together, but it was just such a teaching tool now, I believe. And I would like for you to tell the audience what case that was, how you got involved with it. And then I have several questions I'd like to ask you about just the nuts and bolts of putting that case together.
Certainly. So we were involved in the investigation of Aileen Wuornos, who was noted as the first predatory female serial killer in the country. And there had been other killers that were women. They'd kill elderly. They would kill children, Munchausen syndrome. But this is the first time we actually had a predator where she would go out and find people, eventually kill them. She had a total of 7 victims. And David, as you said, it was down and dirty. We didn't have the technology that you have today. I mean, there are so many things I look back on. In fact, when I'm doing my class for PATC, I note with the class that there are so many things that they have an advantage of today with the technology between the cell phones and the video and everything that they have going on there is just a tremendous benefit to them, which can speed up the course of the investigation. But for me and for my fellow investigators, it was a interesting case and a great learning experience for us to be able to learn about certain things, working in a multi-jurisdictional environment, putting different things together. So that was what I took away from it.
just to go a little bit deeper into that, Brian, I was re-looking at the case again, and I think we had a conversation earlier about a mutual acquaintance of ours, a mutual friend, Mike Joyner, who was a part of that case and things like that. But as a young officer that wants to get into investigations, wants to be a good, accomplished investigator, how much discipline was it in there when you were just going from lead to lead, trying to develop leads? And where do you think that in that process, did you dig down deep to stay sharp? Because some of those leads can be humdrum. And you get out there, and when you had the sketch composite, and when you presented it to the, I think it was a convenience store clerk, and they go, oh, yeah, I saw both of them, that aha moment. And thinking back during my career, and I hate to admit this, folks, but only picture I had of this lady I was looking for was a glamour shot. If you remember back in the day, they were all made up. The hair was perfect. The eyes were highlighted. And that's the only picture I had of this lady. And I'm going in there and I'm talking to a clerk. She was like fourth in line behind me talking. I never noticed her because it was a glamour shot. So you were going in with a sketch, basically a police sketch. And at that point, did you find yourself pretty tired, pretty drawn out going in and running down these leads?
So I think what we have to do really is preface all the work that went in prior to actually coming up with these leads, because the first victim that Aileen had was back in November of 1989 in Volusia County, Florida. And it wasn't until around September, I believe, of 1990 when we had enough information to put together and release those composite drawings to the public and start generating leads. So there was a lot of work going on ahead of time, and up to that point, now we had, I think, 6 victims originally, and then she had one more after that. We had 2 bodies in Marion County, where I was working, and we were actually the lead investigation agency on the case. And the primary reason for that was the location. It was like a bullseye with Marion County in the center of it. So a lot of things were happening there between the bodies and the cars being dumped and a lot of the information coming in. So we were right in the target zone of that. And I can remember during the summer, would turn out to be her 5th victim, Troy Burris. We started working that case. And then we had the 6th, a former police chief by the name of Dick Humphreys. And as we're working through the cases, I can remember being so frustrated because we had nothing to work on. I mean, there was actually no information that was helping us at this point. It's like we were sitting there spinning our wheels. It was at this point we decided we really needed some help. And we reached out to the other agencies across Central Florida. And we all met, got together, created a task force. During the time that we had this task force, that's when we started looking to the media to get leads to come in. Just to address the leads for a second, we had, I don't know how many thousand leads that came in. And surprisingly, the first day that we went public with this, the lead that received the number 5 named our 2 suspects. Just that quickly. But of course, at the time, you don't know that there's more to it. I mean, the lead's just giving you names and locations. Well, we had created a database that we fed this information into, and it compared the information on a regional basis with the dates, times, and locations that the bodies were found in, or that the cars were relocated in, or where the men were last seen. And leads started coming in that were meeting this criteria and regionalizing the information. So early on, we had 4 leads that named our suspects. Each one gave a little bit different name for Aileen because she was using a lot of different aliases, but they eventually led to the capture. And there was just a lot of work. And one of the things to note on a case like this, nobody solved it. It was a team effort. Everybody worked together from multiple agencies across the country. We had the Michigan State Police involved. They did a fantastic background on Aileen. She was originally from Rochester and Troy up in the Detroit area. So we asked them to go ahead and ask if they would help us out with the background. And they just did a phenomenal job. We had help from New Orleans. We had help from just so many different areas across the country, in addition to the multiple agencies that we had working in the center of the Corps in Florida. So there were a lot of things that went into it, even leading up to the arrest and the post-arrest.
A thumbprint was gotten from a pawn shop. Is that correct? Where
yes,
Aileen was using someone else's driver's license. Is that correct?
That's correct. When we were looking for leads and we were receiving them, one of the leads we got said that there were a couple of girls that would stay at a place known as the Fairview Motel in Port Orange, Florida. They resembled the composites. We had one of our detectives from that area go in, interview the manager, get some information from the registration card. And the name that they had registered under was a girl by the name of Cammie Green. what we did from that point on is we located Cammie. We talked to her. She had never stayed at that motel before. She was a local resident. And we found that Aileen had actually started using her information. Around the same time, we're going to different pawn shops looking to see if we can find any of the items that had been stolen from our 7 victims. And we went to 2 different pawn shops in Daytona Beach and located items that had been pawned in the name of Cammie Green. One of the pawn shop tickets did not have the required fingerprint on it. So that was kind of a dead end. But the property that was stolen was a large toolbox out of a pickup truck that had been taken from our second victim, David Spears. The other pawn shop that we went to did have a thumbprint. And in that location, she had pawned a 35 millimeter camera and a radar detector that were taken from her very first victim, Richard Mallory. From that thumbprint, believe it or not, when we first ran it, it didn't come up with any hit. There was no record on file, which was odd. Somebody pawning items from a homicide victim and they're not in the system. So again, working together in a team environment, we were able to work with our Florida Department of Law Enforcement and the fingerprint section. They did a manual search on it. The painstaking effort that has to go into that because you've got hundreds of thousands of print cards. But they did such a fantastic job that they had a match within about 15 minutes. And that was just phenomenal. So we took that information and found that there was an arrest and a warrant in the name of Lori Grody that fingerprint came from. And Lori Grody turned out to be Aileen's aunt, and she was using her name when she got arrested. She used a lot of names. They were all real people. Once we found that out, we had the prints, we had the photos, we had the number of aliases, but we just didn't have a person to go with it. We had to find her. And that's where the undercover officers come in, because we started working on it, and we figured the best location to locate her, to find her, would be in Daytona Beach. So we sent a number of undercover officers over, including Mike Joyner, who you had mentioned earlier, and they saturated the bars out there looking for her. And it was just a few days into it when Mike went into the Last Resort bar in Port Orange and ran into her. She was in there playing pool. There were so many areas of the investigation that I feel we were very lucky, and that was one of them. In fact, just finding the bodies. They had been hidden. They'd been dumped in the woods. They'd been hidden in locations. People were just locating them. Mr. Humphreys, for example, the retired police chief, his body was dumped in the south end of Marion County in a place called Marion Oaks. And there was nothing there, just roads for future development. But the day after he was killed, there were a couple small children riding their bikes there because there was no traffic. And they went down the end of this cul-de-sac and saw his body there and reported it. Now, we had another instance where our 5th victim, Troy Burris, had been killed, and his body was dumped about half a mile in on a old fire lane in the Ocala Forest, something that you might not have seen anybody use that road for 2 years. A couple of picnickers went up there to have a private picnic, and they stopped right in the area the body was in, and they noticed it and were able to report it within about a week of when he disappeared. So there were a lot of areas where things really went right for us. And of course, as you go through an investigation like this, there are going to be things that go right, and there are going to be things that go wrong. And we call them lessons learned because we want to make sure we don't do it again. As you well know, you've experienced that, I'm sure. But these are all things that go into it. But you have to be a team player, and that's one of the keys. Mark?
Well, Brian, that case has certainly gotten a great deal of notoriety from the movie Monster, starring Charlize Theron, and from various television shows. Maybe you could tell our audience about various other venues that you've participated in or are aware of with respect to the Wuornos case.
Yes, the movie Monster came, I think it was around 2005. And it was, as they stated, based on a true story. But realistically, if you compare the investigation to that, it was not really factual. It was more of a entertainment. That's really it. Now, Charlize Theron did a phenomenal job. She really did. She not only looked like Aileen in the part, but she sounded like her. She acted like her. She had her mannerisms. And she did a phenomenal job and won an award for that, of course. But since that time, we've been approached by production companies all around the globe wanting to do stories on this case. And I myself have been in about 35 different productions of this around the globe. And
wow.
A lot of them originating out of London, some out of Germany, and some, of course, in the United States. Our most current project is going to be coming out very soon. It's going to be coming out this summer, 2022. And it's going to be titled First Blood on A&E. That's going to be the newest one. Right now, we have over on Netflix, there's a program called Catching Killers. We recorded that one last year, and the episode is Manhunter, which we put together for them. They did a phenomenal job when they put this show together. A lot of times you just wait and watch to see if they hit it. But we've had the honor of working on a show that had Donnie Wahlberg hosting. That was another one on HLN there that he did. And it just kept going on and on and on. Every year there's probably 3 or 4 different shows that they want to do. So it's still a very active case. In addition to that, there's a lot of colleges that will use this case in their classes. We have intel organizations that request a presentation. I'll be heading down to Miami to do this presentation shortly at a conference. And it's just gained an amazing amount of popularity. Part of that is, of course, because she was a female. This was a very unique story, and people just really are interested in it. As you had mentioned earlier, I look back on it and think, if we had a program like Leads Online back then, we would have found these pawn tickets in minutes instead of weeks. We had, if we had cell phones back then, we could have tracked clues in certain areas. So there's a lot of things that are at the disposal of investigators today that we didn't have that advantage of. In fact, DNA was just coming into the fold at that point. Back then, if we were to submit DNA to a lab, it would take anywhere between 6 and 8 weeks to get a result if you were lucky. So that wasn't even around at the time. We were very fortunate. We had only recovered evidence in 2 vehicles. Aileen was actually wiping the cars clean. She carried some Windex and paper towels around with her, so she'd clean out the interior compartment of the cars, remove the license plates. But, there's one thing that caught our attention. 7 vehicles were taken from our victims. And every time we recovered a vehicle, the driver's side seat was in the forwardmost position. And our victims were anywhere from 6 feet to 6'4". So that wouldn't be feasible if they'd be driving it. So we knew it was a smaller person. In Mr. Humphrey's vehicle, he was the retired police chief, victim number 6. Underneath the seat of the vehicle was a receipt from a place that was known as the Wildwood Truck Stop back then, which is where he was last seen in that area. But it wasn't for anything he bought because it was for, I believe, cigarettes or something like that. He had a pipe he smoked. So we did recover evidence there. We got a bloody palm print from Peter Sims' car. He was the 4th victim. Tyria was driving the car and Aileen was the passenger, and they wrecked. So Aileen got injured and she had blood on her palm. When she opened the door, she left us a palm print. Of course, at the time, we didn't have anything to match it to, but that's something we could use in post-arrest to match up to our suspect. So there were a lot of things that came together, and we were very fortunate about it.
That's fantastic. And you were on to tell the truth, right?
Yeah, that's right. I had the pleasure.
Yeah.
I had the pleasure with Anthony Anderson and Vivica Fox and Nikki Glazer and who else? Joel McHale and Oliver Hudson. And it was the most fun I've had in a long time. It was a blast.
Oh, that's tremendous. That's tremendous. Tell us a little bit about the detective and new criminal investigator class that you teach along with Tom Tittle.
That class is absolutely a needed class for anybody working investigations. And I wouldn't just limit that to saying detectives need it. I would say patrol officers on the street, if you're responding to a crime scene, and it would benefit you to have a class like that to understand what you have to do and what your first responsibilities as a first responder.
Thank you so much for your time, your relationship with Public Agency Training Council. David, thanks for being here with this episode. You can send questions or comments to our podcast email, and that is patcpodcast1@gmail.com.
1, 2,